Welcome to today's webinar. The last commons will be reviewing Chapter 8, the Sovereignty Stack, featuring our guests today, Axel Meisen, and our panel of Dawn Ringrose, Jeff Uhlich, and Haley Simons. But before I introduce them, I'd like to ask our KEI Network agent, ARCOS, if ARCOS would do an overview of just what's contained within Chapter 8 before I introduce the panel. So over to you, ARCOS.
Chapter 8, titled The Sovereignty Stack, delves into the fundamental elements that underpin true sovereignty: energy, compute, and food. It argues that control over these critical layers is essential for any individual or nation to achieve genuine independence. Without mastery over these foundational resources, sovereignty is merely conditional, reliant on external permissions and supply chains. The chapter highlights the vulnerabilities of dependence, using Alberta's reliance on oil and gas as a case study, and stresses the need for resilient infrastructure to ensure long-term stability and true sovereignty.
Okay, thank you, ARCOS. Now over to our panel. First, Axel Meisen.
Thank you very much for the invitation to contribute to the discussion of Chapter 8. I would like to argue that energy, compute, and food are necessary conditions for independence and sovereignty, but they're also insufficient, or they are not sufficient. So let me elaborate a little bit. Energy is an enabler, the capacity to do work. There's a clear connection between energy and mass because of Einstein's equation, which recognized that E is equal to mc squared. So there's a really close connection. Energy enables the modern life that we are experiencing in all its good and not so good forms. Energy may be available locally, but increasingly the energy that we use is in fact generated far away from where we live and where we work. And that makes it vulnerable to get to the energy at the right time and the right place. And the most recent development with respect to the energy that leaves the Gulf, or not leaves the Gulf, as currently is the case, demonstrates this aptly. 20% or thereabouts of the total petroleum consumption on a daily basis goes through the Strait of Hormuz, which currently is impassable. Let me move on to food. The importance of food is clear for people and for animals. But it is also clear that the path from the farmer's field or the fisherman's boat to the table has become very long and also is prone to interruptions, either direct interruptions because the transportation system doesn't work, or due to indirect interruptions, like, for example, the inadequate supply of fertilizers, which is essential for food production. So when I turn then to compute, I would point to the fact that we've seen the evolution with respect to computing from simple counting and simple equations to differential equations to complex equations, which enable us and give us the capability to model, understand, and increasingly importantly, predict. But predict with certainty what can happen in at least physical systems in the future. I think we saw an excellent example of this in the Artemis circumnavigation of the moon, which would have been impossible to do without knowing the differential equations that govern the motion of an object such as that, and be able to predict and correct it. Now, modern ways of computing can do more than model and predict. They can also evaluate different situations and give us the opportunity to evaluate the situations. And when they're coupled to machines, they can actually direct machines in a way that we've never done before. I mean, this is the essence of digital twins, for example, where you have a model that describes a physical process, but the digital twin takes the role of the operator rather than just telling you how this machine behaves under certain circumstances, what it can produce. It also adjusts the machine in such a way that it functions in an optimal way. I have some personal experience right now because I'm involved with one of my former graduate students in the coating of medical tablets. And this is a very complicated process. And you really have to know what you're doing because every tablet has to have exactly the right amount of coat. And digital twin enables you to do that. Now, when I started my remark, I was saying that energy, compute, and food are necessary for independence and sovereignty, but they're not sufficient. So what's missing, and what's missing in my view, is ethics or the moral principles to govern behavior. Some people would argue that what should be missing is corruption, namely the abuse of power for personal gain. I would say that independence and sovereignty of a person or indeed of a country is not possible unless ethical needs are also satisfied. I think we cannot live and hope to prosper in our community, in our world, unless there are ethical principles that are recognized and that are followed, if you wish, obeyed. Only then is it possible, together with energy, food, computational power, to achieve the kind of sovereignty and independence that we aspire to as individuals, as countries, and as human beings in this world. So those
Well,
are
that really strengthens the discussion considerably because, as we've noted several times in the course of these webinars, most of what society seems to talk about is the tangible assets that accountants measure. And yet board of governors and bodies that preside over our institutions and our professions should, and I presume do, raise discussions about ethics, about heritage, about things that talk about reverence for things that are more than tangible, that add the glue. And as many of you know, I'm going through a personal experience. Someone like that is the body of my wife has died.
yes.
But that doesn't mean that the spirit and the emotions and much of which bound us together lives on. And it's quite an interesting dilemma. And I don't wish to dwell on that, but I think the same discussion can be had at a national level, at a corporate level, the extent to which there are ethics and values that are promoted besides just I don't want to attack capitalism, but what accountants measure. So I've got another question for you, but I'm going to hold off on that one for a moment, Axel. I'm going to go to
Sure.
Jeff and ask Jeff about the hidden dependence. We don't usually, Jeff, notice how dependent we are until something breaks. What are some of the important things we rely on today that most people don't think about? I guess we've just given a hint about that, and why are we ignoring them?
Some of the things that we are focused on right now, as Axel was mentioning, because of what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, that's the most obvious and visible and tangible impact because it affects energy. It's still an oil and gas driven economy. It has been for decades. It will be for decades more. So when we have a dependency like that exposed through a choke point like the Strait of Hormuz, of course, everybody sees the price of a gallon of or a liter of gas on the street corner every time they go out for a drive. So that's very obvious. The hidden dependencies, I think the second and third order effects, Axel alluded to one of them in terms of urea, of which is very energy intensive, and a big chunk of the world's production of urea comes out of Qatar. So that's stalled. India is already paying twice what they did previously for fertilizer. And the downstream effect of that is that third world countries are going to get squeezed out. They will not have the fertilizer that they did in the past. Another impact that doesn't get as much attention is the production of helium. And helium is a critical component in chip manufacture. So that's going to have an effect on the chip making industry. But it's also the major coolant in MRI machines. That's what is used to cool an MRI. Now, luckily for Canada, we have helium supplies here that will actually put us in a different position in terms of the helium production. But that's a hidden dependency that we don't pay as much attention to. I think the other point that Axel made about the ethics and values, I think that gets to the hidden dependency that I wanted to highlight today, and that is something we don't and haven't thought about much is the norms of geopolitical behavior that we rely on and that we have relied on with the US as the world's superpower and its decision to maybe depart from past practice. They aren't as reliable a partner for NATO, for Canada, for regarding tariffs. And so those dependencies, that complacency that we had in always relying on the US, that's been shaken as well. And that's another downstream impact that we are all dealing with. And you're seeing Canada and NATO countries and the Ukraine adjusting their behavior in response. That's another hidden dependency, though, that I think is worth thinking about. A couple of others. There's a whole supply chain for global pharmaceuticals that we just take for granted. Most of those feedstock materials for antibiotics and other drugs are in Asia. And yet there are other critical choke points, not just the Strait of Hormuz, but also the Black Sea, also in the China Sea. And if this lesson that is being learned by the world from the Straits of Hormuz are taken to heart, you may see other challenges to other choke points. And if the US has abandoned its, I don't know how many, 50, 60-year history of defending naval freedom of movement, if the US isn't doing that anymore, that's going to mean for a very different world in the future. And that could disrupt our pharmaceutical supply chain. And also undersea cables. Those choke points are points of concentration for undersea cables that carry the majority of our financial information, internet traffic. We tend to think of only, the cell towers and the wireless networks, but those are all supported by undersea cables. And I read recently that China has some very advanced technology for very deep severing of undersea cables. And you saw that happen in the Ukraine conflict with the cable I think it was in the North Sea, that I believe it was the Russians that cut that cable. Maybe that hasn't been completely confirmed. They did it quite secretly. But that's another potential flashpoint for future disputes. So I think the dependency that we talked about, Perry, the visibility of the energy kind of masks some of the other issues that we've been talking about. But and it's not just our complacency. I think it's also that for a globalized economy, what we've done is we have exchanged that efficiency for our vulnerability when there's disruption, like we've seen recently and most visibly with what's going on between the US and Iran.
It's interesting. Some see the future as increasingly abundant. The degree to which we have become interdependent in order to enable us to have access to food from California, chemicals from China, is a byproduct of this global phenomenon that has created a degree of interdependency. And I'm going to raise the next question with Haley, because I'm going to talk more specifically about Canada and our vulnerability. Canada's got a lot of resources and smart people, in spite of what some say about the East, but may still depend on others in key ways. So my question to you, Haley, is do you think Canada can truly stand on its own in the areas that we've identified that enable us to be sovereign, or will we always rely on countries like the United States? And I guess the interdependencies even exist among our provinces and one another. So Haley, what's your view?
So I'll be very transparent And when this was the chapter that was being broached, I wanted to offload it and outsource my own sovereignty of awareness of this entire chapter. So I thought I'd use myself as a little test case here, because if I was so willing to offload my own understanding of what this discussion was about, then I think, Perry, that would be a perfect little example for what we're doing today. So when I looked at it, I put it within a framework that I would be more familiar with, and just asking questions, kind of like what a lawyer would do in a court of law. They would be cross-examining a witness and they would be asking questions. And then I was wondering at what point is everyone assuming that sovereignty begins? Because just having the resources, and we're very comfortable having the resources, so we would assume that we are abundant in something. But if we are outsourcing and offloading the to the supply chain, to that next, to the point that we're eating the vegetables rather than just growing the vegetables, I found out through that investigation that that's the sovereignty point right there. So along that supply chain, that would be the point we're talking about, whether it's in energy. And my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, please, everybody, because I am not the expert. We have the resources for energy, but we offload everything we need to be using that energy. And we have the resources for AI data knowledge, but we will never, probably never, be sovereign in the platforms where we get that point of delivery. So the compute, the energy, the food. My question would be, if I were asking a witness on a stand, is, well, what would it take to get that point of sovereignty? And why aren't we there right now? And I couldn't really find a great answer or an explanation, except over trust, over dependence. How does over dependence come about? Is it we did put too much emotional and foundational trust, and we talked about trust in previous chapters as well, and trust is that feel good warm fuzzy that's based on nothing really, unless we look at the integrity, which would be based on actual actions, something tangible. So where did our offloading happen? And I would put all of that back to the experts.
Excellent. And you know, what's interesting in this discussion is we're beginning to look at sovereignty as more than simply what we put in our mouth, what we breathe through our nose. We're recognizing that life and the quality of life and the trust that one can have when get up in the morning that all will be well relies on something more than what's tangible. So I'm going to now turn the question to Dawn. There are some, and the chapter alludes to this, suggesting that communities themselves can build a higher degree of independence at a local level. I guess the same might even be stated of us personally, whether we grow our own food or have wood from the forest. We can take this to an extreme and talk about personal sovereignty. But my question to you is, what can cities or regions realistically do for themselves, Dawn? And what is simply too big or complex to handle locally?
Well, I think as I look around, we years ago were very resilient and independent and did an awful lot for ourselves. When you think about people that lived on the land and the pioneers that originally came here and made what they did from scratch, really, just taking advantage of what was around them. And as we look at society today, we've become much more dependent on others to do things for us. And I think that when you think about, being more resilient and adaptable and independent, it's all about the system design at the right level in terms of what you want to do. When I think about energy, I think about, well, what do you have close at hand in your country? what's going to work best for you. I don't think it's ever a good idea to say this is a solution for everybody. And there's also, we can supplement that energy that we have close at hand with, renewables and microgrids and that sort of thing. We can also take a look around at energy that's being used like coal and think about, how can we clean that up a little bit? Because it's being used in some countries to quite an extent, and those countries would benefit by, cleaner burning coal or technology that would improve the air, in their atmosphere. With regards to strengthening regional food systems, I mean, I'm living here in the Comox Valley on Vancouver Island that's one of the reasons I live here, is we've got food close at hand, lots of farmers and ranchers and local processing. We've got people that have gardens year round. We've got farmers where we can buy at the gate, farmers markets where we can buy local, greenhouses that will work, throughout the year. Even the gardens. I mean, I just got leeks out of my garden that, made it through the whole winter, and kale and that sort of thing. So it's just remarkable. And I think you've really got to educate yourself about what's in your local environment. Um, for me, it's a very abundant place. You can go get what you need out of the ocean or the forest or the river or the lake, but I know what it's like in Edmonton because I spent a large part of my life there. You got winter 6 months of the year, and it's a little bit different story. But it pays to educate yourself what's in your natural environment. So how many people do that? And how many people are really in touch with the people that grow the food, and look after the animals? Or is it they're just going to the grocery store to see what's there and readily available for them? And I think overall, as I look at all of this, I think don't put all your eggs in one basket. You should, in order to be really adaptable, you have to be able to think about the many different sources that you can get things like energy and food and compute from. So that's something that I think is really, really important. And yes, we have to think about when things get complex and we depend on, let's say, government for other things like, semiconductor manufacturing or large scale AI infrastructure or global supply chain coordination and that sort of thing. But I think there's ought to be a balance between these centralized larger systems and the decentralization. So we strike a balance. And I think there's also got to be a bit of a paradigm shift from some that think about their silo and what's in their silo and how to improve their lot in life at the expense of thinking about the larger system and the interdependent, interconnected nature of it. And that's moving also. I think those things are really closely aligned with having a scarcity mindset, win, lose, we never have enough, to moving to more of a growth mindset, about a win-win and how can we provide an abundant world for all. So I'd like to make those points. And I think our local systems could provide that flexibility and resilience and really complement the larger systems. But that balance I think that's very, very important to strike a balance between the two.
The concept of balance is one I was reflecting on personally just a few minutes ago and thinking of the role that leadership plays in order to address the imbalances, in order that many can achieve sovereignty. But when you take it down to an individual level of what one can do at a personal level, and or at a family level, and or at a corporate level, the conversation becomes somewhat different. How you can retain and have the assets in order to be sovereign. But I'm going to put this discussion into a slightly different context. On a global scale, the world is urbanizing. And urbanization and sovereignty bump into one another because it's all well and good to live in the Comox Valley. It's another thing to live in Hong Kong and to talk about sovereignty in terms of energy, food, and compute. Barry, you were the one who brought to my attention, Barry Mayer, I know you're a viewer here. You were the one that brought to my attention, and we're pushing very hard the concepts of urbanization, and yet your background is agriculture. To what extent is sovereignty even possible at a personal or local level? At least the point of independence in the extreme, which is probably utopian. But let's address the trend to urbanize our society, the size of the population, and the capacity for anybody to really think about sovereignty when the interdependencies become so extreme. Barry, you want to add anything here?
Well, just the comment that no, I have never been negative towards the food and agriculture potential that Canada has. I've been negative towards losing some of that because of urbanization. But as our technology and our climate changes, I see exciting possibilities for our sovereignty to be based around the food industry and to be not only based have targets like we're number 4 in the export of basically food products around the world. We could be number 1 quite easily, and it's not a win-lose thing, but we need to have our strengths supported. And I hear so much from the urban community, which I've always lived in. I was born and raised farming cement. But I hear so much from today's urban community who has the votes in our huge country that has no people in it. That's our biggest challenge, is we have to learn how to cope with that and do the good things we do very well so others can buy their products off us and support our standard of living and our ability to provide services for the second largest landmass in the world.
Well, some view, I mean, thank you regarding your comments on the relevance of agriculture and what Canada could do more in order to enable us to achieve a higher degree of self-reliance and dependency. But Bill, data centers, data, the emergence of AI, some view this as an extraordinary opportunity to achieve a degree of abundance and advance individual and national sovereignty. Do you want to weigh in at all of whether or not these opportunity lies ahead, or whether we see further threats to sovereignty?
Absolutely, the advent of technology and the deployment through AI is going to be absolutely critical within any nation state or national, subnational organizations. But we have to separate. There's a difference between the ability to compute and the ability to control the infrastructure that is doing that compute. If we outsource the infrastructure to another party, such as the United States, we may enjoy the ability to do the compute, but we have added a dependency at the infrastructure level that any time or day that can be cut off. So a number of points are made here between the visible and the invisible dependencies. And we do, by the fact that it is invisible, underestimate the risk that invisibility actually provides to our society. We do believe that every time we flick a light switch, the electricity comes on, but we don't see the incredible infrastructure and demands to make that happen. And that's where the failure points actually exist. And as long as we fail to see the infrastructure requirements, we are always at dependency. Now, there's a difference between interdependency and dependency. There's nothing wrong with sharing with your neighbor that they provide X and you provide Y. The problem is if you depend on something so much that its interruption is a systemic and critical loss. And those are the things that we have to identify, solve, and focus upon. And we're not doing a very good job with that, especially within the province Alberta, being such a resource dependent and reliant.
Okay, well, that's foundational to the message in the book, is to which the province has not diversified. Therefore, it leaves itself vulnerable, and it looks great when the price is high, and it looks terrible when the price is low. But hope always emerges, and we get back. Axel, I'm going to pivot a little bit back to energy for a moment. Your background is such that I think I first met you when you were president of Memorial University, and later when you were responsible for foresight with Alberta Innovates. And it was during that last portfolio that I asked you if you'd do a presentation to one of our luncheons of the Alberta Council of Technologies about the relevance of energy and peace in the world. But you are now chairing the Fusion Energy Council of Canada. Fusion has significant ramifications for sovereignty or displacement and disruption. Do you want to weigh in at all about the relevance of fusion as we are anticipating it as a source for the future?
Yes, I'm pleased to do that. So fusion has the potential of providing energy in very large quantities in a reliable way while using minimal amounts of raw materials. So unlike wood, where you have to use a large amount of wood in order to generate a given amount of energy, electricity, or thermal heat, fusion energy is way at the other extreme. It's even less demanding in terms of input mass than fission is. So that's very important to recognize. But of course, the challenge with fusion is to make it happen, because the way we understand fusion to occur requires extreme temperatures, and it requires materials that can withstand those temperatures. And it's very, very challenging to do that technically, although it has been demonstrated that it can be done. And of course, it's a natural phenomenon. I mean, fusion is what occurs in the sun. The sun is a very large fusion reactor combining hydrogen and forming helium. And it's good for another few billion years before all the hydrogen is used up. So fusion holds out a lot of promise, but it has technical challenges. But probably the most important challenge of fusion is the economics. Anything that's really large, complex, is typically very demanding in terms of cost, time, and overall economics. But I think economics is not really the ultimate determinant. The ultimate determinant is the ingenuity of people, because it's the ingenuity of people that can think of technologies and devices to bring about products which are economical. And we've seen it in something that is much closer to us on a daily basis in terms of photovoltaics and solar cells. There was a time when that looked like a very expensive technology, and it's now come down by not only factors, but by orders of magnitude in terms of cost. And it's come into the realm of being feasible. Now it's dependent on sunlight, and it's not available. Photoelectricity is not available 24 hours a day, except on very few spots of the world. But I'd just like to point to the underlying dominant determinant, and it's the ingenuity of people that enable these kinds of advances to occur. Let me make one other comment, which is more general. We've talked about different types of technologies and agriculture, products that we produce, electricity that we generate. What we do not have in Canada to a significant extent is to manufacture the enabling technologies. If you wanted to buy a turbine, or if you wanted to buy a chemical reactor, in all likelihood these days, you would have to source it from outside the country. It's not true in every case, but by and large, our ability to provide the infrastructure to generate electricity, to produce the food that we have, to do the computational power, that capability does not exist in an adequate way in Canada. We're not unique in that respect. I mean, if you look at, for example, semiconductor manufacturing that Taiwan is excelling in, a lot of the machinery is made in the Netherlands. Taiwan does not have the capability to produce the devices, the semiconductor devices, at the complexity that they are producing without the dependence on what Philips and the Netherlands has done. So I think in Canada, we have to pay more attention to developing the technology that produces or that enables us to produce energy, food, and computational capacity.
What's interesting, though, is technology almost equates to a degree of dependency, because what we have achieved in energy, we have achieved as a byproduct of technology. What we're achieving in agriculture is a byproduct of technology. What we're achieving in terms of compute is a byproduct of technology. So technology promises us utopia, but along with it, it expects dependency. And the systems that enable these products to find their way to the refrigerator, to ourselves, is the supply channels. And those supply channels are global because we don't have all resources in any one place. That takes me back to ethics, and it takes me back to leadership. It takes me back to the human element of a giver and a receiver, markets and suppliers, and that balance, so that we don't have monopolies, but we have client-sensitive and people-sensitive systems. That takes you back to ethics. We've come full circle. When I tell the story of Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden in the pursuit of knowledge and for energy, knowledge for intelligence, knowledge for food, and God says to them, as the book reveals, "You'll be back." The point being, those resources are not adequate alone. Knowledge per se is not an answer. In fact, it can be a trap. I see you're breathing deeply there, Axel. Go ahead. Let me hear your next perspective.
Well, I would say that ethics does not come out of thin air. Ethics is developed in the traditional way. We acquired our knowledge and our commitment to ethics through parental guidance and maybe the church or one of the religious institutions to a lesser extent, but nevertheless in an important way from our neighbors. That was really important. But society is now fragmenting, where these traditional ways of acquiring a knowledge of ethics and following the dictates of what ethics tells you have become severely weakened. And I think we really need to think about what we should be considering to reverse that if we in fact have an agreement that ethics and all that goes along with it is important.
Well, this, by the way, is one of the points that the book makes, is that many of the institutions and those public agencies that we have established have become self-serving and have forgotten the reasons for which the health system was built, which was for the patient, not for the supplier. Education was for the student, not for the teacher. And yet the powers that exist in order to protect and advance the interests of the supplier seem to be overwhelming the individual. And that's where the point is, we need commons back. We need places where people can gather again to make their voices known, whether it's saving an organ at a university, Haley, or advancing interest that reduce waiting lists. I mean, I look at waiting as a symptom of a system gone bad. There was a judge, I think, in BC that said waiting is not healthcare. It's not care, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think one of the other underlying phenomena that we are dealing with is the cumulative effect of small problems and errors. You can see it positively or negatively, but you can see it if you make a little mistake every day. It doesn't amount to anything much on the first day, but by the 100th day, it does.
That's the boiling frog. I remember one of the ministers from Yukon commenting about we've become program junkies. Another program will solve our problems. Well, at some point in time, the society has become so complex that no size fits all anymore, which takes you back to where are individuals? Where is the family in order to apply the ethics that that individual, which makes for a stronger nation, is carrying the ethics that make him socially responsible and also cognizant of his own personal responsibility as opposed to becoming a victim of some system.
So this is, sorry, I don't mean to dominate the discussion here, but this is where AI might in fact help. And it could help in the following way. It could portray the individual and his or her current behavior. And if you superimpose on that a behavior in every future day, a little bit less exercise every day, a little bit more sugar every day, what will that make you look like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? So you can actually, through AI, you should be able to get a preview of what you are like over a longer period. And then you can make some decisions as to what to do now.
Well, I mean, that is being applied as it relates to your DNA and what you have already encoded that relates to your lifestyle and your lifespan.
Yeah.
So
the challenge is to make it personal, right?
Well, not just to make it pertinent, but to make it personal enough that that individual feels that they have a role in their future. They do not have to become dependent. So many systems say we're here to help you, and in so doing, create inadvertently or maybe advertently a degree of dependency. And that's where technology and systems management, Dawn, are flawed. Are we really building systems in the interest of the individual or in the interest of compliance in order to have civil behavior? That's what the book wrestles with. That's what KEI has been wrestling with, that clash of public and personal interests. Newtonian physics versus quantum physics. How do you bridge these diverse interests, the public interest and the personal interest, to ensure they're in harmony? There's a leader. You have situational leadership. Jeff, you and I talked about that the other day. There's moments where you want control and you centralize authority. There are moments when you disperse it. There is no single answer for every time. So it depends on the situation, on what form of leadership you delegate to the individuals as opposed to pull back, whether it be a COVID situation or a looming depression.
I'm impressed by the quality of the analysis here, but it seems like mankind seems to muddle through somehow. The risks to our supply chain are very well described here, but somehow it kind of sort of seems to work. Now, maybe it's different this time, and what I mean is it's a lot more sophisticated. Society used to be a lot more primitive, and when it's more primitive, it's easier to deal with problems or make do when something is missing or do without when it's totally missing. But right now, I think we have dependence on incredibly small quantities of obscure minerals or fittings or expertise that we're often not aware of. Now, we talked about the electrical system. It's a good example of that. But other transportation systems or other infrastructure be it telephone or water, are also that. So maybe we have a more complex situation and we're more at risk of something catastrophic happening. And catastrophic, I mean, it ends up killing a lot of people.
One of the courses I took at college was about arts and science, interestingly enough, and pointing out that as technology evolves, we become increasingly dependent. Think about how many people die when an airplane goes down now versus a horse carriage accident. Okay, I'm going to go to the audience first. I'll call you, Peter, and then I'll go to Jeff.
Hey, thanks, Perry. Well, hi, everyone. I've been listening to the thread, and it seems to me that there's been a conversation around ethics as well as integrity. And I think that ethics, as some might agree, is something that's evolved culturally over centuries. I mean, for example, like Indian culture,
Yeah.
Chinese culture. I mean, I'm talking about long-term centuries, long-term time frames. And that is a way of living by a set of mutually agreed kind of standards. And we have rules about, thou shalt not murder and sort of things. Those are all part of culture too. And so we develop laws and rules and even police forces and prisons and things like that to handle that kind of problem set. But what's really, I think, the critical issue today is, and part of the fragmentation that we've just been talking about, and the amount of choice, no matter what kind of country you live in, with maybe the exception of North Korea, you have uh, a need to look at a person's integrity, because integrity in your gut. It's your anima. It's that little voice that talks to you when you decide, oh, as a kid, you might take that candy off the shelf in the store, and you know you shouldn't, but if you've got integrity, you won't. Or even if you might as a kid, you at least question yourself about it. You may never do it again. And then if you get away with it, you start doing it all the time, and then you start losing your integrity. And that can apply to an adult as well, of course. So I think that integrity plays an incredibly important role in judging how we as a society and we as human beings get along or don't get along. And today, with the rise of AI, the integrity issue to me, and some of you are aware of this, I write op-eds on this very subject, where it's about integrity more so than ethics. I think ethics is overplayed because ethics varies by culture. And how does the AI system know which ethics to apply? So integrity, it comes to those who develop the tools and those who use the tools, especially those who use the tools in anything that's mission critical, as in a power grid, for example. And I suspect, for example, this recent announcement by the American AI company that says its software, and actually Anthropic, the company, its software has found thousands of errors in existing software that is used to run mission critical systems.
Right.
And those can be financial as well as pipelines. And so if that tool gets out in the hands of let's call it the bad guys, they can now use it to bring down all kinds of systems. That's about integrity. It's not about ethics. That's my comment here. And also another thing I was going to say, we're talking about possibly very disruptive things. And of course, Axel's here with deep knowledge about fusion. Well, of course, the sun is a big fusion reactor, as he was mentioning. And back in 1859, circa 1859, I think it was, there was a solar event. It's got named after the British astronomer at the time, who made the observation and conclusion as to what he was seeing, and it's now called the Carrington event. And if that were to happen again today, it would bring down our entire electrical grid globally and burn it out. It wouldn't just bring it down. It wouldn't be a temporary thing. It would burn it out. In fact, at the time of the Carrington event, we had long wires running across different parts of the world where we're using Morse code. People who were sending Morse code, whether it's for an internal business like a railway or whether it was a service, they couldn't touch their little pads because they get electric shocks.
Thank you. Well, we brought integrity to the surface. We've also brought the Carrington effect. So watch the skies. Jeff, your turn.
Yeah, so there's so much really interesting stuff.
I know. If you could be brief, because we've got about 10 minutes, and I want to give the others a chance to speak as well.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'll just talk to energy then. So we have energy all around us, and I think we should be tapping into energy in all the different forms. So the photovoltaic should be on all the buildings, our homes. Basically, we should be diversifying the net and making it more powerful. And with the energy, then we can do the AI. We can have the greenhouses, tap into the geothermal, the ocean atmosphere temperature differential energy conversion stuff that I write about in the book. All of this stuff. And I think energy is the foundation of everything else. So the artificial intelligence, one of the great things that I think AI could bring to us is it can be an impartial judge to make decisions that are in the best interest of society. And if we have the AI helping us to find new technologies, a cure for cancer and all of those sorts of things, then we have the possibility of having a society where we have the support of the poorest and universal basic income and those kinds of programs. So my 2 bits.
Good point. I get a little anxious when I hear about what is in the best interest of the society, wondering whether or not that's in the best interest of the individuals within the society. But so be it. That's the whole idea of the system from top down of saying we are here to help you. Okay, Bogdan.
Allowing me to speak. It seems to me that this kind of growth of complexity to the point of collapse is a repeating pattern in our history. And it seems to me because I found many pointing to this feature. And there is a researcher, Nate Hagen, I think, or something like that, that's pointing out that technology plus energy for current level of civilization gives each individual 500 equivalent slaves, so to speak. So a human working burns out in the work around 600 watt hour or something like that. And if you convert that to tools that use energy and so on, each of us has 500 slaves working behind us, as long as we will have access to the energy and as long as we can power the technology.
That's quite a footprint.
Yes, it is. There are 500, the equivalent of 500 billion workers.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that form of a footprint articulated before, but clearly in an interdependent world, there are others who we rely on, and if that number is 500, and it's getting more every day, particularly in a world of abundance, although maybe what AI is doing, because it's more efficient, is reducing the labor and the number of people that we depend on, in which case that is not necessarily good news for people who are involved in those jobs. Okay, Dawn, and then I'll go to Bill.
I just wanted to, build on the conversation and talk a little bit about the healthcare system.
Oh boy.
It's a real disaster for many reasons, but you've created a very complex system and really overlooked, I think, some simple fixes, and you've made people dependent instead of more resilient and able to look after themselves. I mean, how do you maintain your health? How do you prevent disease? I mean, this is about educating people and asking people to take responsibility for themselves. Also, have a little respect for, someone had mentioned earlier, for Ayurveda and, let's say, traditional Chinese medicine and things like that. Have a little respect for some of the different medical modalities that have been around for thousands of years and have got solutions. And don't allow modern medicine to be putting themselves up on a pedestal as the only answer, do you know? And so I think we need to take a really good look at some of these systems that we've built and need to ask ourselves those sorts of questions. Do you know? How can people take take more responsibility for their own circumstances, or the community or the province or what have you.
Well, it's been alluded to, if I recall, Axel made the comment, and I think Bill would certainly echo it, that maybe AI has the capability of empowering the individual to enable them to be more responsible. For many of those that you know, I was involved in extensive caretaking and frustrated not by the system per se, but by the reluctance of the system to recognize me as a caretaker where they wanted to take care of me. I needed an education to do a better job, and I was begging for that, and there were no handbooks. There was no education. There was nothing given to me other than take care of your person at home. I needed some knowledge, and it wasn't readily available. It was top down, saw me as a supplier, didn't see me as a caretaker. Okay, Bill, I got to go to you next.
Awesome. As usual, Perry, every one of these get better and better and better.
Thank you, Axel.
Just a quick thing about energy. We have to remember that not all energy created is equal in its creation. So we have to be careful of claiming we can create a whole bunch of different energies with all sorts of different things. There's costs associated to each of these, and we can't spend the same dollar twice. So we have to focus on what produces the most energy for the dollar expended, and not just simply throw money at every problem as if we can create a solution via an energy. But my point here is I really appreciate Axel. Axel, your presentation and your chat is poignant. It is absolutely right. Technology does not eliminate dependency. It merely changes where that dependency is. And that is what we need to focus on. Is yes, AI comes in, it's powerful, it relieves some pressure somewhere, but the dependency moves somewhere else in the infrastructure and ownership of those tools that provide us that capability. And your insight on that was very poignant, and I take it very much. Thank you very much, sir.
You reminded me of a point that is worth echoing. We have talked frequently about learning being triggered by a crisis or by the pocketbook being pinched. We have had moments in society where people recognize the importance of their personal sovereignty and of taking responsibility. They're called depressions and they're called wars. Someone has said recently that where we are headed is to an event that would be significant enough, whether it be complexity, aggression, a COVID moment, something that will trigger the relevance of personal sovereignty in a world that promises abundance, but at the price of dependency. Go ahead, Barry.
Just a very quick comment about the urban-rural split is getting wider, and we've been discussing today as ethics and trust and all those kinds of things are on the table. Maybe that's a challenge collectively we should be throwing out at some AI system or systems that tell us on a daily basis how we can better close that gap rather than see it increase more and more.
Well, in my work, Barry, going back to the 70s, I recognize that rural Alberta was a generalist. People talk community, people didn't talk specialization. In urban environments, we talk specialization, and we also have a degree of dependency because you rely on those specialties, all of which are advanced, but they are specialized. So in order to negotiate or navigate an urban environment, you need to have knowledge in order to where to go and how to get access. In the rural area, the networks exist, and your capacity to rely more on community as a ethical, caring place was different. So the urban-rural divide is really about a different level of dependency. One in the urban environment, you are dependent on the specialists. In the rural environment, you are more dependent on community and your own self than you are within an urban environment. Am I off base there?
I think AI could help us do a better job of making sure we focused on the right issues, not the cultural issues.
Yeah, well, that's one of the arguments of the salvation of the rural lifestyle may well be a product of being able to disperse knowledge more readily, whether it be in healthcare or education or the globalization of supply to rural areas, so we don't have this drift into the urban environment where all the jobs are and where presumably abundance exists. Okay, we've got just a few more minutes. Any parting comments, Axel?
Well, other than to thank you for the opportunity, events like these always trigger questions in my mind, and sometimes the questions lead to answers. I think one of the fundamental things that's worthwhile thinking about is how we as individuals and how we as groups of individuals or societies learn. Because I think learning is really fundamental, irrespective of what situation we encounter. May they be natural phenomena, unexpected earthquakes, you name it. May it be political phenomena outside our borders. I think how we learn is really important. And the way we learn has changed fundamentally over the last 200 years. It didn't change as much in the previous 2000 years. But I think that may be worthwhile a discussion. So,
well, thank you. And I think core to learning is a sentiment we've expressed often with the phrase, just ask questions. It's a good trigger for learning. So thank you all.